Okay, let's unpack this. You know that feeling when you're digging through a crate of vinyl records?
Oh,
You
yeah.
pull out one of the classics. Maybe it's the Temptations in those, matching suits, or Etta James looking absolutely regal. You look at that cover art and you see immortality. They look perfect, vibrant, untouchable.
They look like they've won the game.
Exactly. We freeze them in our minds at that exact moment of perfection. But today, we are going to shatter that illusion a little bit. We are doing a deep dive into a stack of stories that, frankly, serves as a massive gut punch to anyone who loves soul, R&B, or just pop culture history.
It really is a heavy load today.
Right.
We're looking at the life trajectories of 17 black celebrities from the 20th century. And while the headline of the material we're analyzing is about aging terribly, I have to say that is a massive euphemism.
It sounds like clickbait, right? See who looks bad now,
Oh.
like something you'd scroll past on your lunch break. But when you actually get into the files, this isn't about wrinkles.
Not at all. I mean, we aren't talking about receding hairlines or gaining a few pounds. We are synthesizing a history of physical decay, sure. But it's driven by untreated mental illness, predatory industry practices, and systemic racism. The mission today is to understand how the show must go on. Mentality didn't just burn these artists out, it physically destroyed them.
It's the cost of the ticket that we never saw. So let's jump right into the first pattern here, the physical toll. Because when I think of Motown, I think of energy, I think of choreography, I think of the Temptations.
The Temptations are the perfect place to start, specifically with Paul Williams. Now, if you know the group, you know Paul wasn't just a backup singer. He was the soul of the group in the early days.
He was the choreographer. All those spins, the Temptation Watt, that incredible tightness they had, that was Paul.
That was Paul. But here is the tragic irony that the history books reveal. The man responsible for their movement was battling sickle cell anemia the entire time.
Sickle cell, that's incredibly painful, and he was dancing through that.
He was doing splits and spins while his blood was essentially attacking his body. If you aren't familiar with sickle cell, the pain comes in waves called crises that can be debilitating. It feels like your bones are breaking.
And in that era, you just didn't take a sick day?
No, the machine had to keep moving.
Mm.
So Paul started self-medicating,
Alcohol.
massive amounts of it, just to numb the physical agony so he could get on stage and smile. And that sparked a spiral. The alcohol bloated him, his skin turned sallow. He literally couldn't perform the moves he had invented.
That has to be psychological torture, to watch someone else do your moves because your body failed you.
It was. He was eventually pushed to the background, his duties handed over to Charlie Atkins. He went from being the front man to being a liability. And the end of his story is, well, it's shrouded in a very dark mystery. He was found dead in a car, a gunshot wound to the head. It was ruled a suicide.
But there's a detail in the files that doesn't sit right, isn't there?
There is. Paul was right-handed. But the gun and a broken bottle of alcohol were found on his left side. It's one of those tragic inconsistencies that has fueled rumors for decades. But whether it was suicide born of despair or something else, it was a violent end to a man who gave his physical life to the stage.
And he wasn't the only one. The industry seemed to demand you work until you dropped. I was reading the notes on Linda Jones, the woman who sang Hypnotize.
A powerhouse voice. Maybe one of the most underrated in soul history. But she was a ticking time bomb medically. She had been diabetic since she was a child. Doctors told her explicitly, you need to rest. You need to regulate your blood sugar.
But the industry says, get on the bus.
The industry says if you aren't on stage, you aren't getting paid. She was doing packed schedules, endless travel, eating whatever was available on the road. Her body couldn't handle it. She slipped into a diabetic coma right between shows at the Apollo Theater.
At the Apollo?
At the Temple of Soul Music. She was literally working until her body shut down. She died at 27.
27? That is way too young. It really highlights how disposable they felt. If they stopped, they vanished.
And that fear drives people to ignore horrific symptoms. Look at Mabel King. You probably know her as the Wicked Witch Eveline from The Wiz or Mama from What's Happening.
Oh, absolutely. She had that big, warm, authoritative presence. Don't bring me no bad news.
That big mama energy. But behind the scenes, type 2 diabetes was ravaging her. And the decline was brutal. It started with a toe, then a foot. Eventually, she suffered strokes that took her speech, her livelihood, and led to the amputation of both legs and an arm.
Wait, both legs and an arm?
Yes. From a vibrant, dancing stage presence to a triple amputee. It's a horrifying image, but it drives home the point. Once the lights go down, these artists were often left to navigate these massive health crises alone, with bodies broken by the lifestyle.
Which actually segues into the next layer of this. It's not just the physical body breaking down, it's the mind. We hear about the tortured artist all the time, but looking at these files, tortured seems like an understatement.
It was neglect, profound neglect of mental health. Phyllis Hyman is the heartbreaking example here. She was the sophisticated lady. She was an icon of glamour, 6'1", stunning, that sultry voice.
She looked like she owned the world. On the album covers, she looks like royalty.
She projected that, but privately. She was battling severe bipolar disorder in a time when people just called you difficult or moody. She was incredibly lonely.
And looking at the timeline, she was performing right up until the end, wasn't she?
She was, and that's what makes her suicide note so devastating. She killed herself just hours before she was scheduled to perform at the Apollo. In the note, she didn't talk about demons or monsters. She just said she was tired.
Tired. That word carries so much weight. It's not just sleepy. It's spiritual exhaustion.
It's the exhaustion of wearing the mask. We see a similar unraveling with Don Cornelius.
Now that one shocks me. Don Cornelius was cool. He was the Soul Train mogul. You don't get more controlled, more polished than Don.
He was the symbol of black power and style. He controlled the narrative. But peel back that cool exterior and you find chaos. A nasty divorce, his son's suicide attempt, and then the physical decline. He had a stroke, he was developing Alzheimer's.
For a man whose entire brand was being smooth and in control, losing his mind must have been his worst nightmare.
It was intolerable for him. He ended his life by gunshot. It wasn't just aging, it was the disintegration of the persona he had spent a lifetime building. He couldn't bear to be anything less than Don Cornelius.
It seems like for a lot of these artists, the gap between the public image and private reality was just too wide to bridge. I'm looking at the notes on James Carr here. They call him a soul genius, but I admit I don't know his story as well.
James Carr had a voice that could rival Otis Redding. But his story is one of the most painful in the stack. He had bipolar disorder that was largely unmanaged. There's a specific incident in Japan in 1979 that is just chilling.
What happened?
He went out on stage, the lights are on, and the band is ready, and he just froze. He couldn't sing. He couldn't move. He just stood there staring while the audience waited.
Can you imagine the silence in that hall?
It was the moment the mind finally just stopped cooperating. Following that, he overdosed on antidepressants. He survived, but he spent his final years in nursing homes, described as catatonic and unrecognizable. He was just staring into space. The music was gone.
That is heartbreaking. It's like the person vacated the building long before the body died. And that leads us to Billy Preston, the fifth Beatle. I think people forget how huge he was.
Immense talent. He played with the Beatles, the Stones, Aretha, but immense trauma. We have to connect the dots back to his childhood. The records showed deep-seated trauma from childhood sexual abuse. On top of that, he was a gay man in the church, in the music industry, in the 60s and 70s.
Talk about a pressure cooker. You couldn't be yourself.
He lived his life torn between who he was and who he was allowed to be. That tension resulted in severe addiction to heroin, crack cocaine. He ended up convicted of insurance fraud for burning his own house down. It's a tragic fall from playing keyboards on Get Back to dying of kidney failure after a long coma, essentially homeless and broken.
It's a heavy load. But, you know, Billy Preston and Phyllis Hyman, they were fighting internal battles. But there's another category here that makes me angry. The artists who were destroyed by external violence, specifically systemic racism.
This is a crucial part of the deep dive. Fame did not protect these black artists from racism or the brutality of the legal system. The story of Sugar Boy Crawford is the one that really stays with me.
Giacomo, Iko, everyone knows that song. It's an anthem.
It is. And Sugar Boy should have been a legend, touring for decades. But in 1963, he was driving a nice car in Louisiana.
Let me guess, that was the crime.
That was the crime. Driving while black in a nice vehicle, state troopers pulled him over. And they didn't just give him a ticket. They beat him so severely that they cracked his skull.
Just for driving.
Just for existing with a bit of success. The brain damage was permanent. He couldn't perform anymore. He had to relearn how to walk and talk. He vanished from the music scene and spent the rest of his life doing manual labor and working as a locksmith.
That makes me so angry. He didn't burn out. His career was stolen from him by state violence.
Exactly. And the system did the same to Little Willie John. He's a pioneer. He sang Fever before Peggy Lee. But he had a temper, got into a fight, and was convicted of manslaughter.
And prison is hard for anyone, but for a black man in the 60s.
It was a death sentence. The descriptions of him in prison are haunting. The records say he looked gray like ash. He was only 30 years old when he died in a Washington state penitentiary. The official cause was a heart attack, but the reality is the stress, isolation, and brutality of that environment just ate him alive.
He went from a glowing young star to a trembling skeleton in a cell.
Yeah. And perhaps the most iconic name on this list, Billie Holiday, Lady Day. We know she struggled, but the details of her death always get me.
It is the ultimate indignity.
She was suffering from cirrhosis and heart failure, lying on her deathbed in a hospital. She is dying. And what does the system do?
They handcuffed her.
They handcuffed her to the bed for suspected heroin possession. She died under arrest, with police guarding her room. It encapsulates everything we're talking about. The system consumed her art, loved her voice, but criminalized her very existence until her last breath.
It's heavy. But we also have to look at the financial side of things. Some of these artists weren't beaten by police, but they were absolutely crushed by the industry itself.
Financial ruin is a recurring theme. The loss of the voice usually meant the loss of everything. Take Mary Wells. She was Motown's first queen. My guy.
But she left Motown, right? That's always cited as the big mistake.
She did, for better contracts that never really materialized. But the tragedy hit later. She was a smoker, and she developed laryngeal cancer. For a singer, that is the end. She lost her voice box.
So she literally lost her livelihood.
And with no health insurance and no steady royalties, she lost everything else. She had to sell her home. She was relying on friends just to pay for treatment. By the end, she was described as skin and bones, unrecognizable from the star she once was.
It's terrifying how fragile that success was. And look at Weldon Irvine. He was Nina Simone's pianist, a mentor to Q-Tip and the hip-hop generation.
A brilliant musical mind. But the financial pressure broke him. The documentation notes he owed massive federal taxes, over $200,000.
Wow.
He felt used by the industry. The weight of that debt and the feeling of abandonment led him to shoot himself outside an office building.
It really makes you think about how we value artists versus how we value the art. And Dee Clark, the Raindrops singer.
Another heartbreaking slide. Bankruptcy followed by a massive stroke that paralyzed half his face. The sources paint this picture of him performing in a cheap motel in Georgia for pennies.
For pennies.
Yes, dragging his paralyzed legs, singing with a twisted face, just trying to survive. It's a far cry from the gold records.
And then there's Bobby Farrell. Now, this one is interesting because he was the face of Boney M, but he didn't actually sing on the records, right?
Correct. He was the dancer, the image.
Yeah.
But when the group fell apart, he was left with nothing. He was living on welfare in the Netherlands.
Welfare, the guy from Rasputin and Daddy Cool.
And his end is filled with a strange historical irony. He was performing as a shadow of his former self, shorter of breath, heart failing. He died in a hotel room in St. Petersburg, Russia.
Wait, didn't I read something weird about the date?
You did?
Yeah.
Bobby Farrell was famous for playing Rasputin on stage. He died in a hotel room in St. Petersburg on December 30th.
The same day the real Rasputin died.
The exact same date in the same city. He died performing as a shadow of his former self in a weird historical loop.
Wow. That brings us to our final group. The ones who didn't necessarily have a dramatic, singular event, but just faded. The slow fade of addiction and time.
Sometimes that is the most painful to watch. Etta James. At last. A legend. But she battled a lifelong heroin addiction.
And later, dementia, right?
Yes. The accounts describe her in her final years as curled up and unrecognizable. Between the leukemia, the dementia, and the toll of decades of addiction, the woman with the most powerful voice in the room was reduced to a frail shell.
And Theodore Wilson, Sweet Daddy from Good Times. I loved that character. He had the slick energy.
A quiet killer took him. Heart disease and stroke. The notes detail how his energy drained away, his appearance changed, and he died at just 47. He literally gave his heart to the work until it stopped.
And finally, Nell Carter, the star of Gimme a Break.
A cycle of cocaine, addiction, and rehab, compounded by diabetes. It's that same pattern. The pressure to perform leads to the drugs wreck the health, and the underlying conditions finish the job. She died at home, worn out.
So what does this all mean? We've gone through 17 names, 17 lives.
If we synthesize this, the message is clear. The stage lights served a dual purpose. They illuminated the talent, but they blinded the audience to the rot happening backstage.
It wasn't just bad aging.
No. It was a combination of unchecked mental illness, predatory contracts that left them broke, systemic racism that put them in prison or hospital handcuffs, and the physical toll of a performance culture that says, don't stop, even when you're dying.
It's a sobering contrast. I keep thinking about the final image the stories leave us with. We have the album cover, young, vibrant, invincible. And then we have the reality, gray, shriveled, broken, gray like ash.
That contrast is the cost of fame in an era that didn't value the human being, only the product.
So here's a thought for you to take with you today. Next time you're listening to a classic soul record or watching an old clip of these legends, ask yourself, how much of their personal destruction are we unknowingly witnessing in real time? Are we hearing the joy of the music, or are we hearing the sound of someone burning themselves out for our entertainment?
It changes the way you listen, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Take care.